Our first speaker is Larissa McLean Davies. She's coming to us from Melbourne, Australia, and she's going to talk a bit about the deprofessionalization of teachers as a global phenomenon.
Thanks very much, Robert, and thanks everybody for having me and for Lena for the introduction. I'd like to just, in the spirit of Bildung, which is great to think about this network as acknowledging different forms of knowledge. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and that the work that I do and continue to do is done on unceded Indigenous lands. And questions around teaching and teachers need in this country, and I would argue across the globe, to be put in that context to understand, certainly here in Australia, as First Nations people, as first teachers. And I was a little reticent to talk about, my ideal teacher or the best teacher I've had, because I guess one of the things that I'm really conscious of is the need to raise teaching as a profession. And there are, of course, many teachers that we all value and for various different reasons. But I'm also, I guess, really conscious of the ways in which my own knowledge as an Anglo-Saxon student in this country was framed by certain knowledge systems. So just acknowledging that as part of this introduction to the presentation. So I've been asked to speak about the teaching crisis, which, as Robert said, is something that is global and that we've in fact known about for some time. Back in 2016, on World Teachers' Day, the United Nations reflected or suggested that by 2030 that we would need something like 69 million more teachers across the globe in order to be able to meet the needs of our diverse students around the world. And so we've known about this for some time, but as Robert said, we haven't necessarily taken up, and it's important to realise that it is a global phenomenon. In Australia, where I'm coming to you from, there's an argument that there needs to be 4,000 more teachers in secondary schools. That's just, that's not accounting for the other parts of the system by 2025, that we need to have many more teachers. So let's just, in this 10 minutes, move through fairly quickly some of the propositions that hopefully we can take up in our conversation time. So why are teachers leaving the profession? Well, most of our research internationally would indicate that there's a combination of things that are causing them to leave the profession. And we hear teachers say it is the unsustainability of their work. We hear about the administration and the burdens that teachers face post-pandemic. I believe that it's been now declared. The American president has declared that we are now post-pandemic, although we are still, of course, living with many of the impacts of that. We had teachers really challenged during this period, and of course, in many cases, doing an extraordinary job in supporting students through home learning. Nonetheless, this has taken a toll. So it does seem to have come to a particular crisis point. In this country, we've had a change of government. We've moved from a Conservative government to a Labor government. And so with a change of government comes renewed attention to major issues. And our new Education Minister has convened a meeting in Canberra, which is where our Parliament meets to talk about the teacher crisis. And so we see that these issues of the unsustainability of the profession, the particular challenges teachers are facing, are being brought to the fore. But why are they leaving? We also have arguments that are because, well, in fact, they're not appreciated for what they're doing. There's been analysis undertaken by Nicole Mockler at the University of Sydney in this country that says all of the media, if you look at all of the media responses to teachers and teaching over the last decade, you can see the overwhelmingly negative news stories. And we just had some beautiful stories of how powerful teachers are in the lives of each one of us coming to the fore. But in fact, these kinds of stories, the value of teaching, the way in which a teacher can actually not just teach you how to do maths or not just teach you how to do English. And as a former secondary English teacher, it's always encouraging to hear how powerful they can be in people's lives. But of course, teaching you what it is to be human in this world and really expanding and testing those understandings. So what I guess, have been arguing in this country and in the public forum that we have here is that one of the challenges and the reasons teachers, I think, are leaving the profession is also because we have deprofessionalised teaching. And what I mean by that is that we're not treating education or teachers as professionals. And there are various things that I could quickly raise to share that point of view. So in this country and in other places, we are not resourcing education in an adequate way and in the way that we would other professions. So when we have really complex situations, and we have, say, in a medical profession, we have a complex operation or a complex series of health issues, we have multiple people on this case looking at how we might best address the needs of this one person, and often multiple teams coming together. That requires significant resourcing. However, in an education setting where we might have schools that are incredibly, in Australia, extremely remote, we do not resource, by which we don't fund, teachers or the schools themselves in ways that are going to support the complex needs of young people in those environments. So there's one thing that we need to do, is to really think about education and how we resource education. So teachers are leaving the profession, and we can look at those symptoms and their immediate experiences. But in order to address it, my argument is we actually need to address the system. We need to look at our funding and resourcing. We know that in this country, and I've written about this, that there are actually 5 different systems, 5 different socioeconomic systems when we look at our high stakes data testing. And we see then that we need to perhaps have different policy approaches to really meet the needs of young people in each of those contexts. We see various solutions to the problem. I'm just conscious of my time, Robert. We see various solutions, fast-tracking teachers into the profession, seeing if people can change careers and become teachers. So I was a lawyer, now I need to become a teacher. And I have some concerns about that, because I feel that we need to acknowledge that being a teacher, and this was captured beautifully by Lena at the start, education is about more than having disciplinary knowledge. It actually requires a great understanding of developing a whole person and their well-being. And in our complex times, this is a very significant task. And so simply having people coming from one profession into teaching and fast-tracking them into classrooms may not, in fact, be the support we need. And what's more to the case, research in the US and in the UK shows that fast-tracking may not necessarily lead to retention. And I guess the question here, of course, is around retention. Many of our discourses that happen in the public space focus on one part of teacher education, which is initial teacher education. Often the first, if it's in a postgraduate course, 2, or in an undergraduate course, 3 or 4 years of initial teacher education. The challenge here, of course, is that when we're just focusing on one part of the system, and in fact in a very highly regulated part of the system, we're not looking at teaching as a whole of career, as a whole of profession. We know teachers flatline in terms of pay in this country and in many others after 10 years, and that they need to move into leadership roles, which are not in the classroom necessarily if they want to progress through the career. So some of the things that we might want to think about is how, if we're treating teaching as a profession, you can retain your role in the classroom, become a mentor, become a range of other really powerful supports for the teaching profession, and think of different pathways rather than the traditional pathway that we have currently, often in many systems, which is through to leadership. So in kind of closing around my 10 minutes, we have known crisis. We have solutions that are being suggested. And my provocation is, what are the creative solutions both to the current crisis? In this country, we're looking at migration, we're looking at a range of other approaches, but what is it that's actually going to sustain the profession? Because we can think of many short-term solutions, but until we address major issues around the system and the way in which it's funded and resourced, and until we until we really enforce and understand that teaching is a profession and teachers should be treated as professionals, then I think we're going to continue to have this problem. And I think that's my 10 minutes, Robert.